Hazel sat in the quiet of her room, her fingers nervously tapping the sides of the mug. The warmth of the tea did little to ease the cold thoughts racing in her mind. It had been weeks since that moment, but every time she closed her eyes, the words her mother-in-law had said echoed through her head. "You're useless. Always have been, always will be." She hadn't expected it, not from her. They had always been cordial, polite, but never close. Yet that one comment, made so casually, hit her like a slap to the face. She had tried to ignore it, to brush it off as one of those things that didn't really matter. But it did. It mattered more than she could admit at the time. There were days when she felt so small around her husband's family, like she was constantly in their shadow, never quite measuring up. His mother's disapproval was the sharpest of them all. Hazel didn't even know where it came from, but it was there, lurking behind her forced smiles and polite comments. It wasn't that Hazel hadn't tried. She had always given her best, even in the little things, like cooking meals or managing the household, all while juggling her job. But no matter how hard she worked, it never seemed enough. She would do everything just right, only for that not good enough look to creep across her mother-in-law's face. That day, though, it had crossed a line. It was supposed to be a simple family gathering, a dinner to celebrate her husband's promotion at work. The evening had started out fine. The table was set, the food was hot, and everyone seemed content. But then, as the night went on, the conversation shifted. Someone had mentioned how proud they were of Hazel's work, how she had helped her husband organize his new project, how she'd stepped up to take on more responsibilities. But then, in the middle of it all, her mother-in-law's voice cut through. "You're so proud of her, aren't you?" she had said, glancing at her husband with a sly smile. "But what's the point? She's still, well, useless. All the help in the world won't make a difference. She's never really amounted to anything." The room had fallen silent. Hazel could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Her husband, sitting beside her, looked uncomfortable, but he didn't speak. No one did. His family didn't speak up for her. It was like they all agreed she wasn't enough. The shame, the anger, it all built up inside her. For the first time in years, Hazel didn't feel like the quiet, patient wife. She didn't feel small. She was done playing the part. This wasn't about her mother-in-law anymore. It was about proving to herself and everyone else that she wasn't worthless, that she was capable, that her worth wasn't defined by their approval. She looked at her husband, his eyes avoiding hers, as if he couldn't even defend her. That hurt more than anything. She didn't say anything, but she made a decision right then. It wasn't going to be the last time someone tried to tell her who she was. She took a deep breath and made a promise to herself. The next move would be hers, and it would be shocking. The days that followed that painful dinner felt like a blur. Hazel couldn't shake the weight of the words her mother-in-law had thrown at her, but one thing was clear. It wasn't just about the dinner. It was about how she had let it all happen, how she had silently accepted being belittled for so long, taking it as just another part of her life. She couldn't continue down this path of feeling small, invisible in her own marriage and family. Her husband, Liam, had apologized a dozen times, his face full of regret every time he saw her. "I'm sorry, Hazel. I should have said something," he'd say, his voice laced with guilt. But Hazel knew that his apology wasn't enough. Not anymore. Words were easy, but actions spoke louder, and Liam hadn't acted when it truly mattered. She couldn't blame him completely. It was clear his relationship with his mother had always been strained, but to let her mother's opinion of his wife shape their lives was unforgivable. She spent the following weeks thinking carefully about what her next move would be. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much power she had neglected for so long, out of fear of confrontation, out of a desire to keep the peace. But now, that peace had come at a cost too high for her to keep paying. Hazel had been working hard for years, steadily building her career in marketing. She had climbed the ranks slowly, steadily proving herself in a male-dominated field. But somehow, she had always felt like she had to work harder than anyone else just to be noticed, just to be treated as an equal. And yet, no one ever truly recognized her for it. Her husband's family saw her as a passive figure in his life, a caretaker, and nothing more. But they didn't know the real Hazel. They didn't know the woman who had turned down countless opportunities to stay at home and be the wife. They didn't know how many sleepless nights she had spent planning campaigns, making deals, and networking, all while carrying the weight of an underappreciated role at home. She had a decision to make, a moment of reckoning. No more apologies, no more silent acceptance. It was time to act. The first step was easy, simple even. She needed a plan, a way to show Liam's family that she wasn't just some passive wife. She wasn't just someone who helped, who cleaned, or cooked. She was her own person, with her own goals, her own aspirations, and yes, her own success. But the hardest part? She knew it wasn't going to come without some sacrifice. She had to challenge the very thing that had made her so comfortable, being the quiet, obedient wife. It was time to show them who she really was. Hazel didn't tell Liam what she was planning. She couldn't risk him sabotaging her. He loved her, yes, but he was also so tied to his family's approval. He wouldn't understand what she was about to do. He would want to protect her from it. But this time, she was going to do it alone. It started with her job. Hazel had a client who was in need of a complete rebrand. The client was a high-end tech startup, and Hazel had been working on a proposal for months, coming up with a vision so bold that no one would be able to ignore it. If she could nail this, it would set her apart from every other marketer in the city. She had been in the shadows of her field for too long, hiding behind a desk and working on projects that were never truly hers to control. But this would be her moment. The night before the big meeting, Hazel stayed up late, running through her proposal over and over, tweaking every word, every detail. She knew this was her chance to prove not just to Liam's family, but to herself, that she wasn't the useless woman they thought she was. The morning of the meeting, she woke up early, put on her sharpest business attire, and looked at herself in the mirror. For the first time in a long time, she didn't see the tired housewife or the overworked employee. She saw a woman who had put in the time, the effort, and the heart to get to where she was. She wasn't just someone who existed in the background. She was a force to be reckoned with. When she arrived at the office, her team greeted her with enthusiasm, all of them buzzing with energy. As they entered the boardroom, Hazel could see the skepticism in their eyes. They didn't expect much from her. They had always seen her as the one who stayed behind the scenes. But she was ready to prove them wrong. The pitch started, and Hazel spoke with a confidence she had never felt before. She didn't stumble over her words or second-guess herself. She laid out her vision, her strategy, her plan for the company's future in a way that grabbed everyone's attention. The room was silent, every person hanging on her every word. When she finished, there was a pause, a long, tense moment. And then they applauded. The client was sold. Not only had Hazel won the deal, but she had also earned the respect of her colleagues. She had done it. She had taken that first step toward proving her worth. But it wasn't just about the victory. It was about what came next. The realization that her success wasn't limited by anyone's expectations. Her worth wasn't defined by the opinions of others. And as she left the office that day, holding the signed contract in her hands, she knew that the hardest part was still ahead. Because now she was going to take it back. Everything. Hazel's heart raced as she stood in front of the mirror, taking one last look at her reflection. It was time. She had done everything in her power to get to this moment, and now she was going to make sure that everyone knew her worth. No more hiding behind the scenes, no more pretending to be someone she wasn't. Her mother-in-law's words still burned in her mind, but they were no longer the poison they used to be. Instead, they had fueled her, igniting a fire that she wasn't willing to put out. It was time to show them. The meeting with the high-end tech startup had been a success. Hazel had left the office with the signed contract, her hands trembling but her heart full of pride. The client was excited, her team was impressed, and Hazel had proved herself in a way that she had never been able to before. But as the week went on, the satisfaction of her victory began to fade. The real challenge wasn't winning that deal. It was showing her husband's family that she wasn't just the woman they dismissed. It wasn't that Hazel wanted to rub her success in their faces. She wasn't like that. But the disrespect had gone too far, and now the only way to prove herself was through action. It had to be big. It had to be something so shocking that they couldn't ignore her anymore. Hazel had been planning for weeks. She knew that her mother-in-law's birthday was coming up, and with it, the usual family gathering. It was always the same. Her mother-in-law at the center of it all, basking in the attention while Hazel quietly served drinks and refilled plates. This year, Hazel decided would be different. She knew her mother-in-law expected her to be the same as always. The quiet, subservient daughter-in-law who did everything for the family without ever asking for anything in return. But what her mother-in-law didn't know was that Hazel had been working behind the scenes on something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. In the days leading up to the party, Hazel's thoughts were consumed by the plan. She had made the decision not to tell Liam anything. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she knew he wouldn't understand. He would want to protect her, to shield her from any potential backlash. But this time she wasn't looking for protection. She was looking for the respect that had been denied to her for so long. The night of the party arrived, and Hazel stood in front of the full-length mirror one last time, adjusting her dress. She had chosen a bold red gown, something sleek, elegant, and completely unlike the modest outfits she usually wore. Tonight, she wasn't just Hazel, the wife. She was Hazel, the woman who had finally found her voice. When they arrived at the party, Hazel could feel the eyes of the room on her. Liam, standing beside her, gave her a smile that was a mix of pride and confusion. He didn't fully understand what she was doing, but he wasn't going to stop her. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. As they walked into the living room, Hazel could already hear the chatter, the sound of her mother-in-law's laughter ringing out. The family gathered around the food as usual, their attention divided between one another and the celebration. But Hazel wasn't going to blend into the background this time. She wasn't going to serve drinks or make small talk. She was here to take control of the situation, to prove that she was more than just a shadow in the family's story. Hazel's mother-in-law spotted her across the room, and her smile faltered for a brief second. Hazel knew that look. It was the one that said, "She doesn't belong here." But Hazel held her gaze, walking confidently into the center of the room where the family was gathered. "Hazel," her mother-in-law greeted her with a tight smile. "I'm surprised you decided to come out of your little shell tonight." The comment hit, but Hazel refused to let it show. She smiled back, sweetly, but her eyes held a challenge. "I think it's time I step out of it for good." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the room exchanged confused glances, unsure of what to make of the change in Hazel's demeanor. But this wasn't about them. It wasn't about making anyone feel comfortable. This was about making them see who she really was. Her mother-in-law raised an eyebrow, clearly not understanding what Hazel meant. "What do you mean by that, dear?" Hazel didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to Liam, who was now standing beside her, his hand resting gently on her back. "Liam, I've made a decision," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "I'm going to be investing the money I've made from the marketing deal I just closed into my own business." Liam's face fell, his confusion evident. "Hazel, we talked about this. We agreed that you'd keep things steady, that you'd focus on home and work." "No," she interrupted gently but firmly. "I've spent too many years being everything you want me to be and nothing that I want to be. I'm building something for myself now, something that's mine." The room was stunned into silence, the shock clear on everyone's face. Her mother-in-law's expression shifted from disbelief to something more dangerous: resentment. "You've always been good at doing what others want," she said bitterly. "But this is a bad idea." Hazel could feel the weight of the room's judgment, but she didn't flinch. "I don't need your approval anymore," she replied coolly, her voice laced with finality. "I'm doing this for me and for no one else." The silence stretched, the tension thick in the air. Hazel could feel the eyes on her, but for once, it didn't matter. She had said what needed to be said, and now she was ready to show them. The next few days felt like an odd mix of anticipation and discomfort. Hazel had never expected things to change overnight, but now, with her declaration out in the open, she could feel the tension in her relationship with Liam's family growing stronger. They were all talking about it, whispering behind her back, trying to make sense of what had just happened at the party. But Hazel wasn't backing down. She had made a decision, and she was going to follow through. Liam, on the other hand, was not taking it as easily as she had hoped. He'd tried to talk to her several times in the days after the party, pulling her aside, looking at her with those concerned eyes that always made her feel guilty. "Hazel, please. I understand you're upset, but you don't have to do this. You're fine just the way you are. Why stir things up with my family? You don't need to prove anything to them." His words cut through her, but they didn't have the power they once did. She had spent her entire life trying to please people, trying to be someone they wanted her to be. That was over now. "I'm not doing this for them," Hazel had responded. "I'm doing this for me. I've spent so many years working for everyone else, and I've never asked for anything in return. But now I need to do this for myself. It's my turn." Liam had remained quiet, his frustration clear, but he didn't say anything more. Hazel knew deep down that he didn't understand, and perhaps he never would. But the realization that she didn't need him to understand was empowering. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that her journey wasn't about seeking approval from anyone, not even from him. It was about proving to herself that she could stand on her own, with or without anyone's validation. The next day, Hazel woke up early, the cool morning air a welcome contrast to the heat that had been building inside her for weeks. Today, she was going to make the first official step toward building her business. She had already contacted a few potential investors, and after the dinner party confrontation, she'd felt a renewed sense of purpose. The next move was already planned out. She would use the money she had earned from her recent marketing project to secure a small office space. She was going to build something real, something that was hers alone. Liam was out of town for a business trip, leaving Hazel with a few hours of quiet solitude to take action. She made the calls, arranged the meetings, and spent the morning in front of her laptop, drafting the first official business plan for her new company. The hours passed quickly as she put everything she had into it, every word and idea reflecting years of hard work, passion, and hidden ambition. By the time Liam returned that evening, Hazel had taken the first official step toward her dream. The papers were signed, the office was secured, and the first phase of her business was ready to go. When Liam walked in through the door, she was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee and reading over her notes. "I did it," she said, her voice steady, but there was an undeniable pride in her eyes. Liam looked at her, his expression unreadable at first. "You did what?" "I signed the lease. The office is mine now," she replied simply, watching as the realization washed over his face. For a moment, there was silence. Hazel could feel the weight of his confusion, but she didn't say anything. She let the silence hang between them, letting him process what she had just done. Finally, Liam spoke, his voice quiet. "Hazel, are you sure about this? This is a big step." Hazel stood up slowly, walking over to where he stood, his eyes filled with hesitation. She looked him in the eye, her expression firm, her voice soft but unwavering. "I've never been more sure about anything in my life. I'm doing this for me, Liam. Not for anyone else. Not for your family. Not for anyone's approval. Just for me." The look on his face softened, but there was still a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle. "I just want you to be happy." "I will be," Hazel replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I finally will be." But even as she said it, a small part of her felt a pang of guilt. She knew how much this would change everything. Her relationship with Liam's family, her standing in his life, everything would shift. And she had no idea if she was ready for the fallout. But there was something inside her that knew she was doing the right thing. She had been walking on eggshells for far too long, worrying about everyone's feelings, wondering if she was good enough. But now, Hazel didn't care about that. She wasn't going to be that woman anymore. The one who let people walk all over her, the one who silently accepted being treated like she was nothing. No more. She was going to be the woman who stood tall, who made her own decisions, who built something for herself that couldn't be taken away. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Hazel threw herself into her new business with everything she had, working late nights, meeting with clients, and making connections. Every success felt like a small victory, but there was always that looming shadow of her family-in-law's judgment hanging over her. They hadn't let up, not by a long shot. Her mother-in-law had called her more than once, asking why she had to make everything so difficult, why she couldn't just be happy with what she had. But Hazel had learned to ignore her. She had learned to let her words roll off her back. Then, one evening, as Hazel sat in her new office, a message popped up on her phone. It was from Liam's mother. The message was short, simple, and blunt. "I'm coming by tomorrow to have a talk with you." Hazel's heart skipped a beat. She knew what was coming, and the thought of facing it head-on made her stomach churn. But this time, she wouldn't run away. This time, she was going to stand her ground. The confrontation she had been waiting for was finally here. Hazel's nerves were taut as she prepared for her mother-in-law's arrival. She sat at her desk, hands folded in front of her, staring at the email she had just sent to a potential client. Despite the excitement that had come with starting her own business, this moment made her feel like she was back at square one, vulnerable, unsure, but determined. She couldn't afford to let fear control her anymore. She had worked too hard for this moment. She wouldn't back down. The doorbell rang, its sound jolting her from her thoughts. Hazel stood up slowly, smoothing down her blouse, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside her. The encounter she had been dreading for so long was about to happen. She could hear her mother-in-law's sharp, quick steps as she walked up to the door. A part of Hazel wanted to delay it, to put it off for just a little longer, but she knew that wasn't possible. This had to happen. When she opened the door, her mother-in-law stood there as poised and unbothered as ever. Her high heels clicked on the floor as she stepped inside without an invitation, her eyes scanning the room with that familiar, judgmental gaze. Hazel didn't say anything. She simply closed the door behind her and led her mother-in-law into the living room. The space was neat and simple, but to Hazel it felt like it had been completely transformed by the weight of what was about to happen. "Nice place," her mother-in-law said, glancing around. "Not what I expected, though. I thought you'd be more settled, more comfortable, perhaps?" Hazel's jaw clenched, but she didn't respond. The insinuation was there. The suggestion that she wasn't living up to her family's expectations, that she hadn't made the right choices. Hazel had heard it all before, but this time she wasn't going to let it get to her. This was her life, not theirs. Her mother-in-law took a seat on the couch, crossing her legs with an air of superiority. Hazel took a seat opposite her, keeping her posture straight and firm. The silence between them stretched for a few moments, but then her mother-in-law spoke again, her tone dripping with thinly veiled contempt. "I've been hearing things about your little business venture, Hazel," she said, her voice cold. "Some people say you're wasting your time, that you're setting yourself up for failure. You've never been someone who could handle the responsibility of running something on your own." Hazel felt a spike of frustration rise within her, but she kept her voice steady, calm. "I think I'm doing just fine. I've worked hard to get here, and I'm not asking for anyone's approval." Her mother-in-law let out a small, amused laugh. "You think this is success? This, whatever it is you're trying to do? You really think you're going to prove something to me, to everyone? You've spent your life playing it safe, being obedient, following the rules, and now you want to break free? It's laughable." The sting of her words hit harder than Hazel cared to admit. It was the same script, the same accusations she had heard from her mother-in-law 100 times before. The only difference now was that Hazel wasn't going to let them break her. "I'm not trying to prove anything to you," Hazel said, her voice quiet but filled with determination. "I'm doing this for myself. You don't get to decide my worth anymore. Her mother-in-law's eyes narrowed, the smile slipping from her face. You think you can just walk away from everything and do whatever you want? You think you can just throw away the life we gave you, the life your husband worked hard for? Hazel's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't back down. Liam didn't give me my life. I built it myself. I've always been working, always been doing something to support us both. And just because I'm not doing it in the way you want doesn't make it any less valuable. This is my choice. Her mother-in-law leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. You're making a mistake, Hazel. A big one. I don't know why you're trying so hard to change things now, but I'm telling you, this won't end well. You're just a housewife who got lucky once, but luck doesn't last. Hazel felt the insult pierce her, but this time it only made her more resolute. I'm not lucky, she replied, her voice rising just a little. I'm smart, capable, and I've worked harder than you'll ever know. I don't need your approval, and I certainly don't need your opinion on how I live my life. Her mother-in-law was silent for a moment, her expression hardening. Then, without warning, she stood up. You're making a fool of yourself, Hazel. I'm warning you. There's no coming back from this. You'll regret it. But Hazel didn't flinch. She didn't react. You're wrong, she said, standing up as well. This is the first time I've done something that's entirely mine, and I won't regret it. Not now. Not ever. Her mother-in-law stared at her for a long moment, and for the first time, Hazel saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. For the first time, Hazel wasn't the one being judged. For the first time, her mother-in-law realized she couldn't control her anymore. The power had shifted. Without another word, her mother-in-law turned and walked toward the door, her heels clicking sharply as she moved. You'll see, she muttered, her voice full of bitterness. You'll regret this. Hazel didn't chase after her. She didn't try to explain herself. She just watched as the door closed behind her mother-in-law, the silence that followed louder than anything that had been said. For the first time in years, Hazel felt free. Not just from her mother-in-law's judgment, but from the weight of expectations that had always loomed over her. She had made her decision, and she knew, deep down, that there was no turning back. The days that followed her confrontation with her mother-in-law were a blur of triumph and silence. Hazel had expected the fallout to be immediate, but to her surprise, things remained calm, almost too calm. Her mother-in-law hadn't called, nor had Liam's family made any direct attempts to confront her. It was unsettling in its own way. Hazel had prepared for anger, for insults, maybe even a confrontation that would leave her questioning her choices. But all she received was cold silence. Liam was still trying to process everything. He had stopped by the office a few times, expressing his doubts. He still didn't fully understand why Hazel had to take such a drastic step. I just want you to be careful, Hazel, he'd say, his voice laced with concern. This could backfire. You're risking everything we've built. But each time, Hazel calmly reassured him. I'm not risking anything, Liam. I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago. I'm investing in myself. This is for me, not anyone else. She had made her peace with that. For the first time, she was making decisions based on her own desires, her own needs. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without its challenges. But Hazel was determined. She knew that this was the only way to prove to herself, and to everyone else, that she wasn't the useless woman they'd all believed her to be. Despite her confidence, Hazel couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was missing. She had made progress. She had stepped up in ways she never thought possible. But the silence from her mother-in-law, from her husband's family, felt like a void she couldn't fill. It was like they had all turned their backs on her, silently judging her every move. The lack of confrontation made her uneasy. She wasn't sure if it was a sign that they had given up or if they were just waiting for her to fail. A few weeks passed, and her business was growing, slowly but steadily. Clients were coming in, projects were being completed, and Hazel found herself more in control than she had ever been. But then, as she sat in her office late one evening, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. She opened it and read the message. "You think you've won, don't you? You think you've proved something, but you're wrong, Hazel. We'll see how long your success lasts. You're still nothing without us." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. For a moment, she froze, staring at the message in disbelief. It was from her mother-in-law. The message felt like a slap in the face, a reminder that no matter how far she had come, there were still people who saw her as nothing more than a failure in their eyes. Her hands shook slightly as she typed a response. "I've never been anything but what I've made of myself. I don't need anyone's approval to be successful." But deep down, a small part of her wondered if it was all true. Was she really enough? Or had her mother-in-law's words planted a seed of doubt that would follow her forever? She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought. She couldn't let this define her. She had come too far. The next morning, as Hazel walked into her office, she felt a sudden weight in her chest. The air was thick with the tension she had been avoiding for so long. She was waiting for something, some reaction, some response, but nothing came. Instead, she focused on her work. She called her clients, scheduled meetings, and focused on the small victories that kept her going. The phone call from her mother-in-law, the text, the insults, they couldn't touch her. She was stronger than they thought. But just as Hazel was starting to feel like she had it all under control, something unexpected happened. Her phone rang. It was Liam. His voice sounded different this time, strained, uncertain. "Hazel, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low. "I've been thinking about everything, about you and your business. I've been hearing things. People have been talking." "Talking?" Hazel felt a sense of dread creep up her spine. "Yeah, people are saying some things about the business, that it's not really going to work, that you're throwing everything away." There was a pause before Liam continued. "Some of it's coming from my mom. She's really worried, Hazel. She's trying to convince me that I should talk to you about it." Hazel's stomach churned. The thought of her mother-in-law getting into Liam's head again was enough to make her want to scream. "What are you saying, Liam? Are you listening to her?" No, I'm just worried. I'm trying to understand why you're doing this. I don't want you to get hurt." His words felt like a betrayal, his hesitation cutting deep. Hazel took a deep breath, trying to keep her emotions in check. "I'm doing this because I have to. This is who I am, Liam. This is my life, my choice. I can't keep living in the shadow of your family's expectations. I can't keep proving myself to them, to you. I'm not throwing everything away. I'm building something real." The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. For a moment, Hazel thought he might hang up, or worse, walk away. But when he spoke again, his voice was softer, filled with regret. "I don't know what to say, Hazel. I guess I just didn't realize how much this meant to you. I didn't know you felt like this. I don't need you to understand, Liam. she replied, her voice strong. "I need you to stand by me, to believe in me." The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with emotion. But for the first time in their marriage, Hazel felt like she was finally being seen for who she really was: strong, capable, and deserving of her own success. The conversation ended quietly, with no grand resolution, but something inside Hazel shifted. She was no longer seeking anyone's approval. She had made her decision, and no matter what happened next, no matter who turned their back on her, she would never stop proving to herself that she was enough. As she hung up the phone, Hazel stood by the window of her office, looking out over the city. For the first time, she saw her future clearly. It wasn't about pleasing anyone anymore. It was about building something that was hers, something that couldn't be taken away. No more doubt, no more fear, only freedom. And as the sun set on another day, Hazel knew she was just getting started. As weeks turned into months, Hazel's business continued to grow. It wasn't without its challenges, but each step forward brought her a little closer to the success she had been craving for so long. Her client list expanded, her confidence grew, and the validation she had been waiting for from her mother-in-law and even from Liam slowly became less important. She didn't need anyone's approval anymore. She had built something of her own, something real, and that was enough. Liam, too, had started to come around. Though there was still tension between him and his family, he began to respect Hazel's choices. He saw the hours she put in, the sacrifices she made, and he realized that he had underestimated her strength all along. Slowly but surely, their relationship started to heal. Liam was no longer the man who hesitated to support her. He became her partner in ways he had never been before, and Hazel appreciated him more for it. But the real victory was something even more profound. Hazel had stopped questioning her worth. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. She was enough, just as she was, and everything she had worked for had been because of her own efforts, her own strength. Her mother-in-law, despite all her warnings and criticisms, had yet to send a message or call. Hazel knew she would never fully win her over, and that was okay. She wasn't doing this for her. She wasn't doing it for anyone but herself. And that lesson, learning to stand on her own, regardless of the doubts and expectations of others, was the greatest gift she had ever given herself. One evening, after a long day of meetings and emails, Hazel sat down at her desk. The glow of her computer screen was the only light in the room as she typed out the final touches to her new marketing plan. As she hit send on the email to her latest client, she paused for a moment, reflecting on everything that had led her here. The sleepless nights, the doubt, the criticism, it had all been worth it. She leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smile tugging at her lips. She had done it. Against all odds, against the voices telling her she wasn't enough, she had proven them wrong. She had done something many never dared to do. She had built her own path. Hazel's phone buzzed. It was Liam. She picked it up, smiling as she saw his name on the screen. "Hey," he said, his voice warm. "I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. You've come a long way, and I know I didn't always get it, but I see you now." Hazel's heart softened. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Not the applause of her family or anyone else, but the understanding and respect from the one person who mattered most. "Thanks, Liam. That means everything to me." As she hung up, Hazel felt a sense of peace she had never felt before. The world outside her office, the people in her life, They no longer had control over how she saw herself. Her worth wasn't defined by anyone else's standards, but her own. And that, Hazel realized, was the greatest lesson of all. No matter how hard the world pushes you down, no matter how many people tell you you're not enough, you are. You are worthy of success, of respect, of love. And the moment you realize that, nothing can stand in your way. The only thing that matters is your belief in yourself. As the day ended and Hazel sat in the quiet of her office, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. She was a woman of her own making. And if there's one lesson she would pass on to anyone listening to her story, it would be this. Never let anyone tell you who you are or what you can become. The power to shape your future is in your hands. You're stronger than you think. Believe in yourself, and the world will have no choice but to believe in you too. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this. Share your thoughts in the comments, and let us know how you found the strength to prove your worth. Stay strong, keep believing, and take control of your own journey.